This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends, and the date is it's March 6th, isn't it? 1978, and I'm visiting in Oklahoma City with the home of Mr. Roy Fletcher, and Mr. Fletcher has been in the cattle business since the early 1920s, and with the Oklahoma stockyards and in Oklahoma since 1937, and is still active in the cattle business. Usually when we start one of these interviews, we open by getting a little bit of your family background, who your father was and your mother's maiden name, and where they came from, a little about them.
My father was born in Michigan, Webster Franklin Fletcher. And my mother was born in Canada, May Hooper.
Could you give me your father's name and your mother's full name?
Webster Franklin Fletcher was my father's name.
And your mother's maiden name?
Elizabeth May Hooper.
Elizabeth May Hooper. How did the family get into the cattle business? Was your father in the cattle, or was he just in the farming?
Cattle.
In the cattle.
Cattle and farming.
How did he get involved in that?
Well, that's a corn country up there. We raised corn and sugar beets, and that kind of goes. We had feed for our cattle. You couldn't sell your feed then; you had to feed it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I often heard him say he never sold a bushel of corn or a ton of hay off the farm all the time he lived there, his lifetime.
Was he farming his own farm in his early period, or was he working for somebody and then later acquired the what?
Cleared it and farmed it. Bought it and cleared it up from timber. That was timber up in that country.
And started raising cattle.
Started raising cattle, hogs.
Where were they shipping to? Chicago?
Buffalo, New York.
To New York, to Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
The wouldn't Chicago have been a closer market? I wonder why.
It's 250 miles to Buffalo.
It was.
And it's over 300 to Chicago.
Oh.
And a few years later, Detroit got a market. Then we switched to Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about 1918.
What about your own life now? When you worked with him in an earlier period, is that correct?
That's right.
And what caused you to decide to come to Oklahoma?
Well, our county, Sand Lake County, it's about 70 miles northeast of Detroit, what we call the Thumb District. Thumb just like that, Michigan is. And everyone went out of the fat cattle, which the price was bad in 1921 and 2, and went in the dairy. Started in the dairy herd. And being a fat cattle buyer and a stalker buyer, why, I just had to make a move. Mm-hmm. And I come down here for Ridley Commission Company, Detroit, Michigan.
What company?
Ridley.
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 Mm-hmm.
Ridley Commission Company.
Mm-hmm. What was their business? What was their total business?
Commission.
Mm-hmm. They're still in business there.
Yes.
The Ridleys, in fact, the older Mr. Ridley we plan to do a tape with.
Well, that's here.
Yes, here.
Yeah. This Detroit. This Ridley's
Detroit. Yes, I know, but isn't this Ridley group, is this Ridley family here a part of that?
No.
No kin, but the same name.
Same name.
Well.
And when I first came here, I went with Charlie Ridley. Mm-hmm. And he was no kid.
Well.
And I was with him 15 years, from 1937 to 1952. Mm-hmm. And then I started Fletcher Cattle Company, Fletcher and Clark.
That's interesting, the same name, and a name like Ridley, and yet there were no kin.
No kin.
The same business.
Yeah.
We're interested principally in the Oklahoma experience, so what I'd like to talk about, now you came here in 1937, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That was really in the middle of the Depression, isn't that right?
Well, just
the latter part of it.
Well, the part of it, land was cheap, cattle were cheap. Mm-hmm. Cattle 5-6 cents a pound when I came here. Mm-hmm. And land was cheap here and cheap in Kansas and Texas. Mm-hmm. And we bought a lot of cattle in Texas, and we got a lot of cattle in Texas from the yards here. That came from Texas to the yards here.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel that was a good time to make a move, 37? I mean, is it?
Well, I was born and raised and brought up in the cattle business. Mm-hmm. and I wanted to follow it. And that's only I had to get out of Michigan to. 1935, I bought cattle in Canada, and in the spring of '35, I went and bought cattle in Alabama and Florida. And
did you have any reason for choosing to come here other than that you just happened to have a job here, or did you decide on coming here?
This Ridley Commission Company was getting cattle out of here. And the man they had said it was too hot here. He didn't want to come back down here, so he wanted me to try it.
Yeah.
So I came down.
Had you ever been here before?
No.
First round. Why don't you describe what it was like as you first remember it in '37? The stockyards, some of the things that were there, and the things that you remember in '37 when you first came here.
Well, what do you mean?
Well,
drop the prices, or
no? Let's think of the physical arrangement of the stockyards. I don't know how much it's changed over the year. Of course, you had Armour and Wilson then. You had of course, you had the big building. You had the Coliseum at that time too, which is gone. Armour's gone. What were the principal installations that you had in '37?
Well, the first thing, we had private treaty selling. Now we do sale, but then we had private treaty.
What is a private treaty?
Well,
How do you handle that?
The commission men get the cattle in there, and we're order buyers. We buy the cattle. Mm-hmm. And I bought cattle for Swift, Fort Worth, fat cattle. And I bought stalker cattle and feeder cattle go Northern Point, Chicago, and Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, California. So our business was to find orders for the cattle was available in this country. And when we first started, everybody they didn't know, they was used to buying Canadian and Northern cattle. They didn't know whether these cattle would work up there or not. And we got quite a bit of resistance. But as they got to use them, they liked them fine. Mm-hmm. They were very healthy cattle. And our business just grew and bigger, bigger every year. We bought more cattle this year out there than we've ever bought.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's been one of the probably as many animals through there as almost any of the major stockyards in the country, isn't that right?
That's right.
Do you remember how many were going through in a year in '37?
See, now our big runs are like Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah.
Then we'd get, well, now I'm talking about kind of the peak season. We'd get 10,000 on Monday, probably 8,000 or 9,000 on Tuesday, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 on Wednesday, 5,000 or 6,000 on Thursday, and 3,000 or 4,000 on Friday. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think there was, especially in the '50s when the drought was bad, I think we had bigger runs then than we ever had since. And of course, it was liquidating kind of the drought.
Do you remember who was the head of the Armour Company when you came here? Do you remember?
Frank O'Neill.
Frank O'Neill. You knew him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Tell us something about these people as you remember them. Do you remember anything about him that might be of interest?
Well, he came from Chicago down here. They say Armour sent him from Chicago down here. We all thought he was a real good cattle buyer, nice, good man. Mm-hmm. And Clyde Manning came from Wichita down here for Wilson. Mm-hmm. And we weren't as closely associated with them. You see, I'm an order buyer, and the other two are getting like Fred Ridley and Percy Cochran. They were commission men. Yeah. And they were more in touch with them than I was. Mm-hmm. I just know them real well, you know,
sure.
But didn't have no business with them.
Where did you office?
The Livestock Exchange Building.
The Exchange Building.
Yeah, I cleared through Cassidy when I first came here. Mm-hmm. And then in the later years, National.
Mm-hmm. Who was president of that Livestock Exchange there at that time? So that was before Holder.
Yeah.
Was Holderby then, or was he? Was it before?
It was one before Holderby. I just can't recall.
You remember his name?
I don't know.
When did Mr. Holderby come in? When did he?
Well, he was there a long while. I'd say he came shortly after I came.
I see. Do you have any remembrances about him that might be of interest?
I thought he was a very smart man
Mm-hmm.
and run a very good stockyard.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was. I think the stockyards was on the way down when he came here,
Mm-hmm.
and he pulled it up.
Pulled it back up.
Pulled it back up.
What was his background? Did he come from here, or did he
Came
come
from St. Louis.
Mhm.
Came from St.
from the
Louis.
stockyards there? Did he come here to take over the
That's right.
stockyards?
That's right.
Did you know W.T. Hales?
No, that was before me.
He was before you. He died, I guess, about 38 or 39. I know he was big in trading, but it was during World War I.
He was primarily horse and mule buying.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
For, actually, when he made his big money on horses and mules selling to the army
In World War I.
for World War One. Then he went into everything.
Uh-huh.
The oldest order buyer out there now, he's older than I am, is Charlie Ridley.
Uh-huh.
That's Fred's uncle.
That's the uncle of Fred Ridley.
Yeah.
Now, there's a Fred Ridley Jr. and a senior, isn't
Yeah,
there?
that's right.
And Charlie Ridley is an uncle of theirs.
The uncle.
Is he with the Ridleys, the other Ridleys there?
No, he's an order buyer. Just
He's
an
an order
guy.
buyer. Uh-huh.
R&L Cattle Company.
Mhm.
I was with him, then his son-in-law come back from the army, and they went in together, and I started my own. And it was Ridley and Lackey. And this Lackey, he was a young man until he died a year ago.
Mhm.
So
I wonder, thinking of that period in '37, were they making money on the? I know it was still the Depression period, and prices were low. Were they making money, or are they barely holding on, or were they? How was the business at that time?
I think they're starting to make a little money.
Beginning to make a
Yeah.
little. They had been through a period when they had not
That's
in the
right.
early '30s.
Yeah, I think 35, 6, and 7 they made a little money.
Mhm.
Of course, it was still cheap, but they got so terrible
Yeah.
cheap there in the 30s, you know.
Mhm.
I think probably the hardest time maybe that they had here was the first couple of years of the Second World War.
Mhm.
They had controls.
Mhm.
I can remember what they were. 1340 was our top on fat cattle. And the next grade was 1240, and the next was 1140.
Mhm.
And it's pretty hard to meet that.
Mhm.
And
What during the Depression period? I mean, were many cattle liquidated were killed during the Depression too? Was that still happening when you came
no,
here?
that ended about 34, 35.
About 34, 30.
Mhm.
Did you experience it up?
Where I experienced was that's what I went to Alabama and Florida for. In 33 or 4, you couldn't freight those cattle out. They wouldn't pay the freight, and they were loaded with cattle, more than they could take care of. So I went still with this Ridley Commission Company. I went down there and started buying those cattle up, 34 and 35.
Mhm.
So, and
What were you doing with them then?
sent them to Detroit and sell them to Swift, to Bone.
Uh-huh.
And we bought lots of cattle out of Canada then too. Canadian market was real bad. And
Well, these you were buying were the ones that I was thinking of those that they killed. Those that they killed off, were they selling them off for meat? How'd they handle that?
we never got into that up there,
You did not
selling them to the government.
Mhm.
No, as I understand it here, they sold those cow herds off here, and I guess they boned some of them out for meat, but destroyed a lot of them.
Yeah.
Just destroyed them.
They just dug a trench and buried them.
Yeah, that's what I
Mhm.
understand.
Yeah.
We didn't get into that up there.
Now, my father-in-law.
Come on over, Bob. This is Bob Campbell, Robert B. Campbell.
My father-in-law farmed, and he bought primarily. He'd farm in a low-income area. He'd always raise a good feed crop. Then he'd buy and sell cattle. And he'd get distressed cattle from a fellow that didn't have the feed to carry him through. And he thought he was a lot better trader than anybody there in the stockyards. And he talked about tricks and things. There was any tricks or anything people would pull, or where they'd try to cheat you when they'd bring cattle in there?
I don't.
Now, he thought that he could pull some tricks and other things that he really, but I know at one time talked about feeding some salt or something and some other thing on the cattle and that with a bunch of water and other things.
Sure, you
and
get
stuff.
all that, but a person that's bought cattle any length of time knows whether they're full or whether they're empty. You don't get far that way.
Did you did you run into any situations like that?
Yes.
What? How'd you handle those? What?
Well, generally you just left them alone. I mean, you'd say, well, when they get in condition to sell, we'll be back and bid on them.
The Bob, was your did your in this liquidation? Did your father-in-law, did he have any involvement in that, or did he have any experiences in that area?
Oh, primarily. I mean, he didn't hold them any time to move. He wouldn't have held cattle to where they would kill them to sell to the government. He would move them into the stockyards and sell them, or sell them to somebody else, or buy them. What he primarily would do would find somebody that didn't know what the market was, and he would buy them and move them on into the stockyards. And he had communication with somebody here as to what the price of cattle was. But he never did any of that part with the government. He'd sell them even to do, but primarily when he was a small operator, he'd go out and buy enough cattle to pick up a truckload. And the big difference was in that he never actually, I don't think he ever had a real good cow in the time he's farming. He's 90 years old now in the time, but he just never got into the period where they had good cattle. And we farmed out near Leedy and in and around here. He moved primarily that a lot of times he'd buy a farm in a low-income place that was run down and go in and build it up and sell the farm and make a profit on it and trade while he was there and move and buy and sell cattle. But he never got actually into the thing. Primarily he operated more buying cattle from somebody that was distressed cattle and haul them into the market and buy them into somebody.
Well, we don't get that like we did when I first come down here. We had that when I first come down here. Of course, people didn't have money to buy feed, but we don't get that no more.
They didn't have any sales then.
Is your father-in-law still living, you say?
Yes.
Is he active at all now?
No, he's in a rest home up at Edmond.
I wonder if you have any unusual or funny experiences that you remember during the early period. Bob, you might, since your family's been in this area, you might be able to help suggest a question that might. But any interesting experiences, any unusual things, funny things, or sad things that may have happened during, we're thinking of this early period, of first 2 or 3 years that were there, that may be of interest?
Everything I can remember, I thought, I didn't know how a person ever gets started, get enough money to get started.
To get started?
Yeah. That's the only thing that worried me. Or it didn't worry me, it just kept at it till. And of course, a lot of people say, was you broke when you come down here? And you couldn't borrow enough money, you got broke. Banks were closed, and it was this Ridley Commission Company in Detroit, Michigan, really gave me a good start. They sent a letter down here; they'd pay for anything I bought, and of course that really helped out back at that time,
Well, didn't actually with a lot of the bankers, they were cattle people. A lot of the people who ran banks out in these rural communities. And if a fellow knew cattle, he had no problem actually getting a loan, especially if he had land or feed, a place where he could move them. And
we didn't have no trouble in the 20s getting money either. But we, talking about the 31, 2, and 3. Now, I made money in 34, which everybody talks about, but I made it in trading, buying and selling. But 31 and 32 and 3, like we had two bank failures in our town. Both banks were closed.
And that was where?
In Eoff and Peck, Michigan.
I lived over in eastern Oklahoma. They had 5 go broke over there. And
Well, we just didn't have no bank. That's all there was to that.
Where'd you borrow your money when you started here? When you started your own business?
The only money I've ever borrowed since I've been down here was Kansas City, Kansas. Livestock National Bank. Never borrowed another penny. If I ever run our business on that.
That was for your original investment?
Well, I was running cattle out in Amarillo on wheat. and we want to buy 2,500 calves, and I don't know any bank here that want to finance it. So we got it from there, and she financed it, and we started there, and I remember
What'd you have to borrow at that time to get started? How much did you have to borrow at that time?
about $200,000.
$200,000.
Yeah.
And with the
Now, but I had to put 25% down. Like if I bought $200,000 worth of cattle, they lend me $150,000. See, I had to raise $50,000.
with the cattle as the rest of the security.
Yeah.
And you went from there. You raising on your own. The in your how many acres did your area cover? Your cattle cover? How many?
Well, I rented it off from the government at Brookville, Kansas. There's a bombing range up there. That's just east of Salina, west of Salina, Kansas. And that's 15,000 acres. At least off from the government, 1946. Kept it 20 years.
So from that point on, what year was that?
46.
46. From that point on, you were raising and selling.
Yeah.
Purely. And were all your sales through the market here?
No.
Where else did you market?
Well, I sold cattle in Chicago, and Kansas City, and Detroit, Cleveland, Los Angeles.
What are some of the principal problems over the years of raising and selling cattle?
Weather.
Weather. Why don't you tell us about some of the worst weather problems you had, some of the bad years, and some of the things that happened?
Well, 1948, 13th, 14th of March, we lost 125 cows in a snowstorm in Salina, Kansas. And there's like the sheep men up there, they just wiped them completely out, the insurance company. That was 13th and 14th of March, 1948. That's the worst storm we ever got into.
It was bad in Oklahoma, too, that year. That's year they had all that ice, pulling lines, power lines down.
Yeah, I'd bought some fat cattle in Phoenix. I was down to Phoenix, shipping fat cattle in here. And, of course, them cattle coming in so much colder climate, it was terrible when we got here.
Well, these cattle literally froze.
They're more smothered than freeze to death.
Is that, in other words, they would congregate and smother the ones down low.
We lost about 50 of them crossing the ditch. It was, filled up with snow. And they just plunged in there and plunged on top of each other and smothered to death.
My goodness. You lost 125.
Yeah. And we lost a carload of, next worst deal I lost quite a lot of cattle in Shenry up at Vici, Oklahoma, one year. You got that at Leedy, too.
I'd never didn't know them when they were out there at Leedy, but he was out in through there, and then I think it's like on this year
that flood in Kansas in 1951, we lost a carload of bulls that we shipped from Detroit. That flood. That was a pretty
like
good
on
loss.
This year, did you run cattle on wheat up there?
Yeah.
In the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what has actually been the effect this year of this snow being on the ground so long? Did anybody winter any cattle on wheat in weather like this?
That's what I'm doing right now, and you just got to feed them. I just got a bill right there today of $5,000 some for feed I bought, because I didn't have the wheat.
When you spoke of losing a carload, did you lose? Was it that number? Did you have a car? Did you have a car that was loaded?
Yeah, on the train,
It was.
Carload of bulls.
I see.
And we had them insured, and they wouldn't pay for them. And the railroad, they call the act of God, they wouldn't pay for them.
How'd you lose that carload of bulls? So you said it was flood, but what did you?
Yeah, don't you remember that flood in 51 and 2 in Kansas there? They just washed them off the train and washed the cars off. And just lost them.
Just right off the cars.
Yeah.
Even that high up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that same flood. Washed they had a bunch of automobiles on there that washed off.
Yeah.
They pulled them out of the water, and at the same time on that flood, pulled the cars out and cleaned them up, and they had everybody worried all over. Every place you went, there was a rumor that those cars that flooded up there was that brought them down here, and these used car dealers were selling them. Scared people to death.
We went. It was happened just out of Wichita, about I think it was around Newton, I guess, maybe a little further up than Newton. And we went up there, but heavens, the water was 15 or 20 feet deep all over that country. There was nothing we could do, nothing anybody could do. I never saw anything like it. Just terrible after you got to Wichita.
Did you lose anything in the weather this winter?
Nothing big. Just had some cows that had
Yeah.
a little age to them, go down the ice and things like that, but just one or two here,
Yeah.
one there.
No,
you know.
no large,
No.
no large.
We had another pretty bad year out in Texas. I believe it was 41. Had a pretty bad storm. We didn't get hurt so bad, but a lot of people lost a lot of cattle out there.
Was that from drowning or freezing?
Blizzards, they call them, you know. And,
What are the habits of the cattle in a storm that brings some of these things about? What are some of their own habits?
The cattle just go berserk. You know, they know, cattle can tell about a day before when a storm's coming. And they just go berserk. Just go through the fences, and they just head away from the storm. They just keep going, going, going. You know, you'll ever find them 20, 30 miles from your pasture.
Did you ever have them stampede?
No.
Does this happen often? Domestic cattle?
I don't think so anymore. Like it did when they was driving them. I don't believe there's no stampedes anymore.
It's a different type of cattle.
Yeah. Those are the longhorns that stampeded,
Yeah.
particularly.
Well, you stampede was you were driving them across the country. They were in strange places.
Yeah.
And they moved, and there's no fences or tied down. There's anything that you have now. I think everything's fenced now, isn't it?
The only thing I saw resemble that at all was this Chapman Barnard, you know, had a ranch up here at Pawhuska, had a 100,000-acre ranch up there. And they bought some cattle in Central America and brought them up there. I tell you, they were rough to handle. Bramer cross and mixed with, they was black. They said it was mixed with fighting bulls. You know. That's the only thing I saw.
They have stampeding problems with them?
Yeah. They couldn't, they couldn't keep them fenced, or just jump the fences, and couldn't drive them.
Yeah, were those for beef cattle or just
Yeah, they bought them for beef
rodeo
cattle.
stock?
They bought them for beef cattle.
Were all of yours that you raised for beef cattle, you never raised rodeo stock or any of that?
No,
did you? Do you recall any other weather disturbances that caused them, other than the ones you've mentioned?
Well, we had a pretty bad one up to Visay, where I got cows 4 or 5 years ago. Snowed in, but our death loss wasn't big. They couldn't get feed to them for 3 or 4 days, but we didn't have no big death loss.
Next to weather, what have been some of the other problems that you've been faced with that have over the years? Thinking of prices, thinking of.
Well, I guess prices would be next.
Why don't we talk about that? Some of the bad years and the good years, and what seemed to cause it to be that way.
Well, yeah, I guess the first one that comes to my mind is cattle got to a peak in 1951. Got like 37, 38 cents a pound. Well, they broke very, very sharply in 52. Broke down to 18 cents a pound. And I guess that this country, you see, we're kind of a country of surpluses. We can produce more stuff than we need, but you're anything. And we just got too many cattle in the price goes down. And we had an awful bad break in 64. And then this one in 73. Cattle losing more ahead, and nobody ever heard tell us losing as much as cattle lost in 73. And of course, all the cattlemen lays that on the government. They put a ceiling on them. And then when they took them off, why, the price went the other way. But The government never said you couldn't sell those cattle,
Mhm.
you know. So I don't know who's to blame for it. We never got hurt bad in '73. So
Did you raise your own wheat?
I never farmed.
You never farmed at all. Did you raise any of your cattle feed?
No.
Did
Oh, maybe hay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. No, I never farmed.
Did most of the cattle people, did many of them farm, or did most of them specialize pretty much?
Well, no, they pretty near all farm. You know, of course, a rancher, a big one like Chapman
Yeah.
Barnard or Daubys or some of those people, they're strictly cattle. But you know, a man with 100 head or 150 head, he's a farmer, a wheat farmer. But I guess Chapman Barnard's the biggest in Oklahoma. They used to run 20,000 steers. And Daubys, and there's 2 or 3 of them out west. They're awful big. But the bulk of the cattle's handled by people that handle from 50 to 200 head of cattle.
How about the feedlots? Did you did you utilize feedlots?
Yeah, all the time. My son's got an interest in one up in Nebraska, and I just reading I got a report today what they're doing, what the cost gain is, and one thing and another.
Why don't you talk a little about the operation of feedlots, particularly some of the big ones? How they how do they operate?
Well, the bulk of them have customers, and maybe we'll take one that's 20,000 feedlot. There's not very many of them feedlots that they try to get customers, you know, like me or somebody that handles cattle. They come down this country, the ranchers and things. Well, I had 240 steers in Kansas this year. I sent them to Nebraska. I feed near all the time in Nebraska. I sent them to Nebraska to feed. They can do it cheaper than I can do it. Charge you 8 cents a day to feed them. That's the labor, see, plus whatever the feed costs. Well, 250 cattle, that's $20. I can hire one man for $20. See, but they do it on volume. And now they don't feed a lot of cattle themselves, many of them. In fact, they don't want to feed any of them. They don't have to. But if they don't get enough customers, they'll fill some pens by buying them themselves. See? And it's a big business. That feedlot deal is a very big business.
Who are some of the big ones that you know in Oklahoma? Who are some?
Well, I guess Hitch would be the biggest feedlot in Oklahoma, Guyman, Oklahoma. And the National Commission Company here in the yards has got one out here at Yukon, Oklahoma, and holds about 10,000 cattle. Then Kingfisher, east of Wakarchi, Kingfisher, they got one hold 12 or 13,000 cattle.
The Borellis have that one up there?
No, very popular name up there. I'll think of it in just a minute. King County feedlot. Them is the 3 biggest in Oklahoma.
Have you had
Purdue.
Have you had any of yours in any of those lots? All 3 lots.
Oh.
Did you know Henry Hitch Sr., the old Hitch?
Yeah.
Tell us something about him. He came here very early and kind of
Well,
grew up.
I couldn't. I know his partner in Kansas real well, but I knowed him and I know the other Hitch, but I wasn't close enough to the operation, though, so I could tell you very much about him.
He died about 67 or 8, I think. The older Mr. Hitch. Of course, Lad Hitch, I think, runs it now. Did you know the others in Kingfisher? Did you? Well, of course, you probably didn't know him too well because you had a little difficulty with his name. Who's the one you said The Borellis.
The Borellis are a big fan of. They've been farmers
Yeah.
and cattle people up in
Yeah.
that area. That's a whole tribe of them.
Yeah.
They come to the yards all the time. We've
Mhm.
known them for years.
Mr. Bradley's still living. We did a tape with him about 5 or 6 years ago, but I don't.
I don't believe that the old man is.
He
Marguerite's father.
if he died, it's just been the last year.
Could be. Well, I guess he's still alive then. I think.
We did a tape with him, and he had a stroke about a week later. That's been 3 or 4 years ago, but I don't know.
But they were originally in the cattle business. Then when they hit oil up there, I think they branched out a lot more. But they were primarily going in where you talked about where you farm. I mean, originally wheat.
Yeah.
Where you run your cattle as an auxiliary, which you can use when if you pasture. I think it is. If the wheat is just right, you can do real well pasturing your cattle on the wheat. Now, doesn't that make the wheat better?
Yeah, I think it did. Put some manure on there. They claim, we buy a ton of cottonseed cake. Why, they claim it's worth $10 a ton for fertilizer after it feeds it. So I guess it's worth something to the land.
I had wondered. I didn't know. In the cattle that were eliminated during the 30s, why they didn't use them for fertilizer if they weren't going to use them for, rather than bury them in bulk.
Well, primarily everybody was broke. Now, my father-in-law at that time, he was selling cattle, getting a penny and 2 cents a pound for them. It's in the early part of the 30s, and the reason what they buried them on this one thing was they were trying to get the surplus down on the market, and they weren't using fertilizer. They didn't buy any with cattle at 2 cents a pound, and I think wheat was 6, 7, 8 cents. Cotton was 4 cents. You didn't fertilize that thing. You worked all year on cotton. You made $30 for farming all year. You didn't buy any fertilizer. And what they did at that time was actually that if you had cattle, you used the manure for fertilizer, but there was just no way of actually moving it. And what they did was the government just moved in there. Well, they didn't even have any bulldozers or anything else to bury them. I think some of them they burned. But they didn't kill as many, I don't think, as a lot of people like you think that they did. Of course, that became a political issue. They talked about killing pigs and cattle and a lot of other things. It's just like everything else they talk about on the government to get into there. There's no way in the world you can set up a government agency that knows anything about cattle.
Oh, I think a lot of them deals they took over and sold them to somebody else, I know Chapman Barnard bought a lot of them, and I've heard them talk about it. I don't think they killed so many of them.
But a lot of people bought them and just turned them loose on a place.
I think it was 6, 7 years ago, the feeders was putting their calves there because they're losing so much money. They wasn't putting anything there that's worth anything much. That was more newspaper and,
If you had a television crew out there and a newspaper man, you'd kill something.
Yeah.
But you found a lot of people that bought cattle and different things and had some land which was spread out, and they just turned them loose on there and let them run wild. They'd spent no money on them, and they went back there, and if there was any increase or anything, they came up and had it. But a lot of them is your farmer at that time, well, he'd use either kill a steer or a hog every year and supplied his own meat. Things a different type of world now entirely on your farming.
That's what happened when I went down to Alabama and Florida in the 30s. All those small raisers that had 3 steers or 3 cattle or 10 cattle or 20. They had them company stores at that time down there, like Pace Grocery Company had a bunch of them down there. Well, they'd get in debt and they'd bring in a steer or a cow. They'd give them so much for it, put a brand on it, and turn it loose, just turn it loose. What happened, they had road law. They had to fence cattle in, see. The land didn't belong to them, they just turned the cattle out there. And I bought a lot of cattle off in Pace Grocery Company. They'd round up the whole countryside, and sell their cattle out there. Well, this road law come along, and the cattle all had ticks down there, and the government built them vats and made them dip them for ticks, so they could ship them. They didn't want that, and they didn't want to fence it, so a lot of them just sold their cattle. But they were no good. I mean, they were inbred and run there together. And then the good operators, after he cleaned up that and had a little money, he started buying, some good cattle out of here. And I sent a lot of good heifers out here down there. White-faced heifers start the herds, They'd sell 10 to this man, 12 to that man. And like your eastern Oklahoma there, you know, them cattle's no good back there 25, 30 years ago. They all run out there, southeastern Oklahoma.
I grew up in eastern Oklahoma, and what you had over there, you had 30 and 40 acre farms, and where they primarily raised cotton, and the farms were too small to make a living. And what they had, you don't even see the cattle anymore like you see then. They had thin cattle, and they had knobby knees and all sorts of things wrong with them, which it's entirely gone. That was the only cattle they had over there then when I was a kid. You didn't see any good cows.
First time I went to eastern Oklahoma, everybody told me, don't go down there. Don't go east to the Santa Fe tracks. I went to McAllister, Oklahoma. I met a fellow named Lee Hopper, cattleman down there. I bought lots of cattle down there. Most of them originated out of Arkansas and raised there, but they were plain cattle. But we had a slop contract, which is for whiskey. They made whiskey up there, you know, Illinois and up in there. They feed them that slop to make the whiskey. And they answer the purpose just right for that.
Would it be fermented slop? Would it?
You just take after you run your. You did the same thing. Your breweries had the same thing. Once you run your mash through there and it made your whiskey, you fed your cattle, and some of them fed hogs. And I understand it was about as good a feed as you could get. They said those cattle actually had alcoholic cattle. They'd be out there and they'd drunk all the time.
Yeah.
Well, you know that feed was pretty well much intact, and they fed those cattle cheap, and we sent a world of them up there. And those cattle just bought what they wanted for that, and rugged and run outside, you know. And some of the better ones got so they used a little grain at the last end of it too, you know.
Now, someone we interviewed talked about some hogs getting drunk on the mash, on the waste mash.
Your cattle did the same thing. It's just like anybody else. That was a good feed, except that it still had some alcohol in it. And there was, I think, just like on now, you've got some silage ferments as to where they get drunk on that. But
this Charlie Ridley, I told you I started with down here, that's still out there yet. He had an order from Kentucky, one of the big distilleries in Kentucky. We couldn't hardly buy enough cattle to satisfy that when they wanted them. You know, there's certain times of year they want them more than others. Boy, he'd call down here and just get out and get them. You know, we got to have them. We just shipped them things there by the thousands down there.
And that was what was?
It was a brewery.
What was he doing? Fattening them up with his?
Yeah.
He would take them and then he'd fatten them.
Well, one of them was that sour mash. Was it Daniels? Jack Daniels.
So he'd buy yours and he'd fatten them up with mash and then sell.
Well, we were just buying them off in the yards here and in the country for him to go down there. You see, we had orders.
The same thing down in Florida. Haven't they found out that citrus fruit down there that it's a good feed where they make the orange juice? And one thing that in Florida has become a big cattle country because of the byproducts. Of course, what these people are that run these places and buying these cattle on this distillery, that's the guy that knows how to make money. And he doesn't waste anything. Of course, he had the expense of getting rid of that if he hadn't fed it. So actually everything that comes up there is all the way, it clears up an expense on getting rid of his waste product plus what he makes out of his cattle.
Then he probably sells the manure.
Oh, it's manure. Of course, there's the thing
You
now.
got to get rid of everything.
Well, you're going into the market now, they don't know what they're going to do about that. But you're talking with your energy shortage and things that way, and these big feedlots, they don't know what they're going to do with manure. I noticed there was a deal talking about over in Taiwan that a family over there can raise 4 hogs or 5 or 6 hogs. They use the waste products to make a methane gas they work it, and it gives them enough fuel. Now they don't need any heat, but it gives them enough gas that they can do all their cooking with it. And the question is, you go into the cattle industry, is going to change. Now you get these big feedlots, is what they're going to do with the manure. But it's, what's this old boy out here in Colorado and the fellow out there that got about 1 million head of cattle in a...
Montford. He's the biggest I know.
I understand. I've never seen it, but I've heard that you can smell that thing for miles.
Oh, yeah.
Got everything of all the farmland leased up on both sides of the river.
We had an order by an outfit in Chicago, and bought it in '48 and closed it up when the yards closed up there. And we used to get feed from sweet corn outfit out there. It stalks, them peas, give it to us for nothing, just to get it all the way. After they took the corn off, they grind it and we make silage of it.
A lot of things that you got free before are pretty well used now as byproducts today.
Yeah.
Even like the meat market, you could go get all the bones you want, and even scrap meat, you know, to feed dogs, but you can't get free today.
I was noticing their hulls. When I come down here, hulls, cottonseed hulls, was $4 a ton. I noticed there was $48 a ton.
$48 a ton for
Yeah.
cottonseed hulls.
Yeah. Now they're supposed to be a waste product.
Yeah.
At one time, your seed was a waste product.
Now they tell me this is before my time down here, they tell me you used to take a ton of seed into the mill and get a ton of cottonseed cake for it. Today, a ton of seeds bring $62 and the cottonseed cake costs $160.
Was cotton still important here when you first came here? Or was it
Yeah, like Southwest always has been, hasn't it? All this down in that country.
It was the money crop. What cotton is, cotton was a sharecropper's crop. And what you actually had, my dad used to talk about on this thing as to what you had on when you get a tenant on there, and it usually was a black man. You'd ask him what size family he had. Did he have a one mule family or a two mule family? Now, a one mule family was where the old man was the only male big enough to plow with. And with one mule, he could plow enough land, and he had enough family that they could pick all the cotton that you could raise with one mule. A two mule family, there was a boy big enough to plow with the other mule, and he had enough kids that they could pick all the cotton you could raise with two mules. And that was always it was the cash crop, and about the only cash crop. And that's what your tenant farmer worked on, was cotton. And you had worlds of it. There used to be talk about actually on that to get rid of your cotton seed around the place. They give them to you if you'd haul them off. You know, they found they don't feed on them. And at one time they used to feed hogs with them, but they fed nothing but cotton seed, and you've got to feed something else or you end up your fat's yellow and soft. So actually on this one thing, it comes the thing of scientific, get the right kind of cattle. I guess you got to know what kind of feed to feed them. That thing about these feedlots, that the whole thing is done by a computer, I think, on these big ones.
Well, that's the reason they like them eastern Oklahoma cattle for them breweries. They had age to them. They'd be 2-year-old cattle. And they could handle that feed better than these young cattle could, see. Well, back at that time, those people would buy those cattle when they weighed 400, 500, 600 and keep them till there's 2-year-olds. Weigh 800, 900. That's just what they want.
Yeah, they just turn them loose, and I guess you'd have to round them up when you go to buy them. And you used to see over there that talk about shipping them by rail. But you ever alongside the railroad, you'd see where there'd be a little old cattle run where you could herd some cattle up there to maybe wouldn't hold over 15 or 20, but it'd run right up to where you could load them right into a boxcar.
Yeah, every town had stockyards, you know, where you could load cattle. Like Clinton, Oklahoma, and El Reno, and all there. When I first come here, pretty near everything came by rail. Just a few trucks. And the trucks started up. And we shipped everything by rail, only the short haul ones, like shipped to Detroit, or shipped to Chicago, or shipped to Cleveland, or shipped to Los Angeles. Everything went by rail.
What's the ratio now? Rail to?
No, there's no rail left.
No rail left at all for cattle.
No, they just discontinued here, and we were one of the biggest ones here. We
Even the Santa Fe doesn't ship any.
no.
They don't even have any cars anymore.
You never see them. I hadn't thought about it, but I hadn't seen cattle cars on there.
They'd run out of here like Monday, Tuesday. Fort Worth cattle come up and connect with ours. They'd run a train of cattle the first 3 days a week to Chicago. You know.
When did rail go out on cattle?
Oh, it hasn't been too long. 6, 7 years ago, 8, 10, something like that. But it hasn't been big in the last. Because rail was cheap to what trucking was when it first started. You know, all trucker wanted is go a couple 100 miles. But now he's got these great big trucks, you know. he can, these big trucks can haul about the same as 2 cars of cattle. Well, if we put in 2 cars. Car, we used to load about 28,000 pounds, and these trucks hold 54,000 pounds of cattle.
Are you shipping now to other markets outside of Oklahoma City, or is all your stuff coming here?
Yeah, we're shipping. See, we don't sell nothing here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're the buyers.
Yes.
Now the other 2 men you're interviewing, they're the sellers here,
Yeah.
commission men. See, we're order buyers. We buy the cattle that comes in here.
Yeah, I'm talking about that you raise.
Most of mine go to the feedlot.
Do they go to feedlots? I see.
I had a few old cows here today, but any of my steers go to the feedlot.
You sell them into the feedlots, they fatten them, and then
No, I own them.
you own them. Yes, but from the feedlots after will they come here? Will they go?
No, you see, mine. I pasture most of the cattle I pasture in Kansas, and I go in Nebraska with them, and I pay them for feeding them, and I still retain ownership on them.
Then you'll ship them into one of the
Oh, I just sell them right there at the feedlot.
right there at the lot.
Yeah.
I see.
Swift or Highway Beef,
I see. They buy them right there.
right there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you sell to Armour and Wilson when they were here?
Yeah.
The what do you attribute Armour closing out here?
I think it was a very bad mistake. I hired their next to top man, and he's
Who was that?
Jim Perkins, and he's in he will shoot in Plainview, Texas now, buying cattle for Missouri beef. One of the good cattle buyers I ever saw in my life, and I hired him. I guess he's with us about 10 or 12 years.
Why do you think they went out though? Why did they quit?
I think it was just bad judgment from the front office up there. After this, Frank O'Neill retired. They sent several people down here to take his place that didn't fit at all, and they just the thing never made money. And see, they lost this. Highway Beef is the biggest in the United States now, and most all of them was Armour men that started that. So they lost practically all their good men to Highway Beef.
Iowa beef.
Yeah.
They didn't pay.
They didn't pay.
They didn't pay enough to keep any good employees. We got a lot of Armour people went to work for the OG&E. E.J. McCormick was out at Armour. Chester McCarty was out at Armour. And they just end up, and just like any other place, when you lose your good people, you don't make it. And they held on out here, and they didn't keep their plant up or modernize it to the extent that they had. But still on this thing is the
I
number
was
of beef.
just an independent. I figured Jim Perkins was the best cattle buyer they had. They shouldn't let me have Jim Perkins.
Yeah.
Reason I hired him, I was buying Swift cattle, and it just got too much work for me, and he was bought cows and bought fat cattle, and I had to hire somebody to do it.
It's rather ironic, as I remember, Swift's had that big. Not Swift, but Wilson had that big fire. Isn't that correct? And then after the big fire that almost destroyed that plant, Wilson rebuilt and became big, and eventually moved their corporate headquarters here. And Armour was the one that closed out. You know, people thought for a while that maybe, when they had a big fire, that maybe Wilson was going to leave, but it turned out the other way around.
That fellow down in Dallas ruined Wilson, though. LTV.
LTV.
They ruined them. They sold out the best stuff Wilson had.
They did what?
They haven't been a good outfit since that.
Well, that happened to a lot of companies. You had these holding companies that moved in, and they bought these places up and bled them. That's the thing that happened to the railroads. They sold off a lot of the stuff that was making money, never put anything back into them. But
That was an awful mistake letting him get a hold of that.
Yeah.
They could have been a big company here. They have never been near as big since.
Well, LTV still owns Wilson, though. Still there. Still, don't they? Are they?
no, they bled it and then sold it.
Yeah.
Once they take all those
Yeah.
things, they move into them on a financial deal, they pull everything out.
Yeah.
See, their sporting goods was a big money maker
Yeah.
for them, and he sold that out,
Who owns Wilson now, then?
Well, the stockholders do. I think it's an independent.
It's independent again.
Stock-owned company. But it's having management problems now.
Yeah. I know Ling went broke, and then Ling lost his interest in LTV.
He broke
And-
Wilson, he broke Jones Law and Steel Company. He knows what he's doing. But I think they set them up now. He sold out their, which another good money maker they had was their fertilizer deal, and he sold that out. He sold the sporting goods deal out. And I think when it comes down just to Wilson Foods, I think like you say, they kind of set that up as a separate deal, see. And I think they've made it go pretty fair since
Well,
they started
they're in
that.
trouble now, though. You see where that they've got them up for paying, bribing employees in these stores, the buyers, to buy their meat.
I didn't see that.
They got an investigation where that they'd been paying people to buy their meat, and that's, of course, they catch a disease once it gets mixed up like this Ling-Tung Cobalt on this thing. You get up to where that you operate dishonesty on a lot of pictures, and you just can't make it that way. You eventually get caught up with it.
They lost money last year, I know. That was a bad year.
Well, your packing companies always lost money from the way they kept books on the process, and so really you can say that a company's losing money. You don't know whether they are or not. It's just like a lot of people in the cattle business. I know a fellow. I got a brother-in-law he's not big on the big cattle on this thing, but hear him tell he never has made a dime, but he lives real good.
Yeah.
Must be Deacon.
He buys
It doesn't have Deacon, is it? We got
No.
a trader out there that's lost money ever since he started, 30 years ago.
That's the skill to be able to do that, isn't it? To lose money and still live pretty good.
Well, we've made money all the time and we tend to make money, but we work for it too.
What are the biggest problems of the cattle business? You've talked about some. You've mentioned weather and others. What are some of the other biggest problems of the business, as you've seen it?
Well, market's going down awful bad, hurts you, but still, I've always had one saying. I said, if you have a good year, take care of your money, because they'll be calling back for some of it. It's not like a salaried person. I've made more money some years than I was entitled to make. And I went 2 or 3 years and never made a penny, too. You know, which 73, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
I couldn't keep ahead of it. Everything I'd done, our business was good out there, but we just couldn't keep ahead of it. But we kept close enough ahead of it so we didn't get hurt.
Doctors and lawyers move into the cattle business to the extent where they buy up farms and affect your market.
They don't hurt me any.
Did they ever hurt anybody, or they get in and get burned and get out?
That's exactly what they do. And they'll come. I've had so many of them people come to me and they say, oh, I got 80 acres, I got 90 acres, I got 120 acres. How many cows can run? I say, well, you can run 1 to 5 acres. It's pretty good country, you know. Well, they'll go to somebody and he'll set up and he'll tell them twice that many. And they get into a little dry weather and, you know, have to sell out. And they don't want no part of it. Don't want no part of it.
That's what my father-in-law used to like to farm down in poor farm country. Now, he couldn't make the crops, but he didn't pay as much for the farm he bought. And what he would do is just like the fellow you was talking about, that would come in there and get more cattle than he could handle, and he wouldn't know how to sell them. What my father-in-law would do, he'd raise enough feed, and there was always a market for feed. And if he could buy up cattle, especially cattle in poor condition, that he'd take them and buy them up, and he wouldn't buy many, maybe 15, 20, 30, 40 cattle. But he'd buy those at a discount price. They were in poor shape. He'd put them up in good shape, and actually only put some more pounds on them, but get a lot more, the price would be higher. And I don't guess you can make any money with poor cattle.
Got to take care of them. We have quite a local trade here, you know, like when wheat comes, people come to you and want to buy 100 or 50 or 75 or 200. And they always, you know, of course, what's this cattle market going to do? They're going to get higher or cheaper? I used to try to guess a little, and I quit that quite a long while ago. I just, if you've got the feed, I'd buy the cattle. If you haven't got a place for them, you know, keep them economical, I'd just forget them.
Who are some of the most memorable people you remember you knew in the Oklahoma City stockyards area? Some of them that stand out to you.
Well, I think Charlie Ridley, Frank O'Neill,
The
Holderby. And there's several commission men there. Jack Jessup's been there for a long while, commission man. And Harley Brown. Harley Brown was there when I came.
Charlie Ridley goes back farther than any of them that you've talked about. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
Yeah.
He's one we ought to interview.
He's 84 years old.
He's 84.
He's out there yet.
He's still out there. I was.
And I think he's bought more cattle than anybody out there. I might be next, but I think he's bought more than anybody.
What's his relation to Fred Ridley? He's his uncle, you
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
That's Fred Ridley Sr.'s uncle.
Yeah.
And you got a hold of Charlie through the same office as Fred? Or
No, R&L Cattle Company.
R&L Cattle.
Yeah, Ridley and Lackey.
Uh,
Lackey was his son-in-law.
Do you know when he came? Do you know when he first started that?
I'm going to say he came in the, let's see, he's 84. This is 78. 84 from 78. 86. I want to say he came 1918,
Right
20.
after World War One. He'd be a good one because he could really get us back.
His brother, he's living yet, but he's not out there. He went to World War One, John Ridley. When I came there, the two big order buyers was Bill May and Charlie Ridley. And I went with Charlie Ridley, and his brother went with Bill May. We bought the bulk of the cattle.
Bob, do you think of anything else that we ought to ask?
Oh, not that I really know of. It's such an interesting thing. Even the trade of the people that worked out there in this changed on this one thing. It's like used to fascinate me. The people that made money working out there was a calf skinner.
The calf skinner.
The calf skinner. Now I don't know what all they did on the one thing, but it's supposed to be that. But I can remember hearing them telling about how much money a calf skinner can make.
I'll tell you the one thing that amazes me. Now, R&L was bigger than we was till Lackey died. Now I think we're bigger than they are. But I know we've bought as high as 4,000 or 5,000 cattle one week. Not every week, but we'd probably average 3,000 cattle a week. Well, we send them to Kansas, and we send them to Nebraska, and we send them to Texas, and we send them to Ohio, and we send them to Michigan. And they just call up and say, I want a load of 700-pound choice cattle, or I want a load of Holstein cattle, or a load of this, and you tell them, draw a draft on them. And, I have more time trouble getting a check cash for $10 than do going out there and paying for the cattle. Nobody ever questions it. You draw a draft on them, they pay it.
Yeah, but don't you know the people you're dealing with, and have dealt with them?
Not always. Now, for instance, I'm sending cattle to, we'll say, to Red Oak, Iowa, which is a lot of cattle fed around there. And I send a man a load of cattle. And a fellow calls me up tonight and
This continuation, talking with Roy Fletcher and Bob Campbell. You were talking about.
yeah. You say, well, I like a little cattle just exactly like Glenn Davis. I like those cattle. What do they cost? Well, they cost 43 cents a pound. Send me a load. Draw on such and such a bank. Now, I have never. I got one bad check from some packers in Fort Worth, but I've never got a bad check from a farmer.
From where?
A farmer.
Oh.
You know. I bought a I bought a boy 2 loads of Holsteins one time in Omaha. In about a week or two, he didn't send the money, and I called him, and he said, I thought I could get it, but I can't. He said, I got the cattle, and I'm taking care of them. And he told me he had lots of feed, and I said, well, go ahead, we'll take care of the deal, it's all right. But once in a while, something like that would happen. But the only ones you got to watch is somebody that's trading here and trading there and running here and running there, and just, you know.
Well, there was a story in the paper here a while back where somebody up there that either had a feedlot or a packing plant, they bought a bunch of cattle on this thing, then they took off and left it, and there were a lot of cattlemen up in there lost money because this fellow, he paid them with bad checks.
Well, one of the biggest, this American beef, you know, third biggest packer in the United States at that time. We bought their feeder cattle for them. We just lucky we didn't get hurt, but they just lost a world of money. But he buys a new plant out there in Texas. Swift bought it all from him. He borrows $25 million to build it. Borrowed it from a finance company, General Finance Company. Well, they foreclosed on him. Shut him up. He didn't have no business building that plant. He had 3 besides that. But if a farmer here in Oklahoma or Texas calls me and wants a load of cattle for wheat, I don't pay no attention to it. I just buy them and send them to it. Because you see, you know where he lives, you know where the trucker takes him. If he don't send the check in 2 or 3 days, why, you still got the cattle something. You know something about it. You know, it's like I got a real good friend that's got a feedlot in Valley, Nebraska. Well, he'll say, so-and-so's going to call you. You want some feeders. I'm going to feed them for him. And it kind of connects in with people you know, see. And
What is the name of your company, your own company?
Fletcher Cattle Company.
Fletcher Cattle Company. And where is it officed in the?
Yeah, we got office there in the Exchange Building.
Who's operating that now? Are you operating?
Well, I go down there some, but my boy.
Your son operates it. What's his name?
Robert.
Robert Fletcher, and he's doing most operating now. I like Bob. Bob Campbell. You mentioned the one thing that interested me, and that's the calf skinner. Now, are you talking about a calf skinner who are you talking about a soured? Making it skinning? Are you talking about selling the skin or what?
It's in the skinning of the calf. They don't do it anymore. It's a process which it doesn't be, but way back yonder when I first came to Oklahoma City. But the people that's talking about that made the most money, I know that people in accounting was making about $15 to $18 a week out there. And I think this calf skinner, a good one, can make $25, $30 a day. But it's a matter of the skill in which they take that skin off without
cutting the hide so that
to where that it was to bring the top price that hide and the speed with which they do it. It's just a skill. I think you put in there had to be born with the skill or to be act like an athlete to be able to do it. But I don't know enough about it. I never was out there to see them do it or anything. But I can remember talking about is the amount of money that a fellow with no education, a lot of blacks.
Yeah, the colored people got in on that. $50 a day way back there. Of course, that's all pulled on the machine, hide pullers.
Yeah. Basically, then they were working not by the hour, but by the skin.
By the skin.
And they were not selling the skin; they were doing.
No, they were working for either Armour or Wilson.
Yes.
But it was a skill as to which you had and as you moved.
I never knew that. Had never.
Well, I guess they stopped doing that by the time you were old enough to even be around any of it.
Might have been. Of course, I was never around packing plant much or around stock much. So
Did you ever go to Kansas City when that was wide open up there?
Yeah, I bought cattle in Kansas City.
But I can remember reading the stories about the things that went on in Kansas City, how wide open the place was, and that your best beef, didn't they used to take your choice beef here and ship it to Kansas City and get a stamp put on it and bring it back?
Oh, I don't.
Or is that just a story?
That's probably a story. In fact, when I first come down here, we didn't have good beef down here. We had good feeder cattle, but nobody fattened cattle like they do in these lots. There was no lots like there are now. There was no fat cattle much here. Few farmers had some pretty good fat cattle.
Well, they didn't even raise any corn.
Oh.
when did the lots begin here? The big lots.
Well, about in the 50s. The 50s. I guess that's the reason I got started in Nebraska, is,
No lots here at the time.
no lots here amount to anything at the time, and the market was better up there, and I had that government lease in Kansas, and I just grazed them cattle and fattened them in Kansas. I never, in Nebraska, never quit.
That's the reason, actually, I noticed on the TV, you show that they show the Oklahoma City market and they show the Omaha market.
Yeah. Omaha's the biggest fat cattle market there is now. Omaha is.
But we got a Christmas present this year. They sent us 4 little fillets. Came in a big old box. It was filled with dry ice on the thing with a booklet and a lot of other stuff. Omaha beef.
Yeah. Yeah, commission man that I shipped cattle to up there, when I fed a lot of cattle up there, he used to send me a quarter of beef for Christmas every year, a hind quarter of beef, that Omaha beef. And we didn't ever have no beef like that down here then, that was back in the 30s and 40s. We just didn't have that kind of beef.
Before the Hitches built their feedlots, they were mainly cattle, just mainly raised cattle.
Raised cattle, yeah. They had a partner, Mr. Hitch had a partner. I bought lots of cattle for him. His name was Frank Atchison. He was from Kansas, and they run a lot of cattle in Kansas too. All the Oklahoma and Texas people run cattle in Kansas, raise them in the Flint Hills, Kansas. I think Kansas is the least publicized state I ever saw, and I think it's one of the best ones. They got feed, they got grass, they got just about everything it takes to be in the cattle business.
Got a pretty stable government.
Yeah. In Texas, I'll go along with Texas. Everybody says they blow, but they got a little something to blow about out there. We bought one-man calves down there at Midland, Texas for I don't know how many years, Scarborough Cattle Company. And you don't have to see them weighed. You just tell them how many calves you got, and he tell you how many you got, about what they'll weigh, and
I had a brother who was in the oil business down in Midland, Texas. Went down there to see him one time. He passed away a little over a year ago. But we was out there and there's drilling this oil well on this ranch. You could stand up on that drilling rig. You could look in any direction. You couldn't see where the fence was, the end of that land. And there's some rancher down there that's in that thing that still hasn't drilled on his ranch. He said he's going to just stay in the cattle, but don't want to drill yet.
Mess up his cattle.
He got everything he wants on this thing, and his children are going to end up with a lot of oil money.
He won't let them drill. He's got a big ranch in Vega, Texas. He won't let them drill on that.
I don't know who it is, but there's someone out there got this big ranch, and they know there's oil under it. But he said he's not an oil man; he's a cattle man. Of course, now he's old and everything, but he's came out there when the thing opened up when it was wild and woolly, and must have moved.
This Mr. Barnard, chap Barnard, Dave was big in the oil business, owned a bank in Tulsa and hotels and things on that ranch there, and he said he'd rather make $10 off a steer than $100 off an oil well. He just liked the cattle business.
Maybe the sons will be oil people.
Well, you heard this story, didn't you, about this salesman had a $1,000 bill and he liked to impress people. And he was out there in Texas on this thing. There was this little old town. There was a cafe there. It had utility poles holding it up, keep it from falling over. Been riding along. He thought to go in and get a cup of coffee. He went in there, and there was 4 old ranchers sitting back there in Levi's and cowboy boots and old hats, playing poker. And he went back, thought he'd impress me. He asked if this game was open. And he said yes, it was an open game. So he pulled up a chair, and he pulled up a chair, and he pulled this $1,000 bill, and he threw it out on that table, and he said, "Give me that many chips." Well, what, he stuck the $1,000 bill in his pocket behind his Bull Durham stack, and threw him one white chip.
I think them older, well, like I know a lot of people in Texas, like Mr. Weeman with Swift and Company, and Henry Lawson got a feedlot of Texas, and Bob Huell of Amarillo. They're people who impress you. You know, they're all wealthy, made lots of money, but the wealth don't seem to go to their head in any way, you know. They're just people, just like anybody else. See. They want something and call you and want something. Well, you don't worry about anything. It would make no difference how many cattle they said they wanted. You know, if they said they wanted 2,000, you know they could pay for 2,000 cattle, or they wouldn't tell you. Like Mr. Hitch and those kind of people, you know. If Mr. Hitch told you he wanted 5,000 cattle, he'd know he could pay for 5,000 cattle before he told you he wanted 5,000 cattle. He'd make arrangements to pay for them. And we had a man here in the stockyards, Bill May. He's the wealthiest man in this stockyard. Had lots of money and lots of property and everything, you know, a big operator, but he just, that's the way he done business. If he told you he wanted something, why, he was, he married Charlie Ridley's sister, oldest sister.
May,
Yeah, William H. May. He was something else.
yes, he's not living now.
No,
is that right?
no. Workingest person I ever saw in my life.
Is that right?
Yeah. Those people worked.
Well, that's the way they got started.
They worked. This Charlie Ridley, John Ridley, they worked. We worked out. Bill May work all night. I quit him 11 o'clock. That was my limit. I wouldn't stay after 11 because I didn't know nothing after 11.
How early does cattle start coming in there?
Well, we used to start buying at 8 o'clock. But I've been out there at 5 and 6 shipping cattle, you know, so we'd have pens to buy cattle.
Your hours was determined by how much work you had to do.
That's right.
There's no way you get more than 24 hours in the day, though.
No, I never got 24. I got maybe from 5 to 11, but I never fooled with that 24 business. Because I had to have 4 or 5 hours sleep, you see.
Tell a little about the procedure of buying cattle. What do you have to do now? You have that many come in. You obviously can't examine that many cattle in one day. What's the procedure? How do you do that?
Well, it's a thing that I can't hardly tell anybody, you know. We'll say, of course, they used to say a good sorter, something like a calf skinner. You know, if I was a good sorter of cattle, I could go along and bunch these cattle up and sort them up. And I could make enough money sorting them up for size and looks and quality to make good money at it, you know. Buy, say, 10 here and 10 off from you and 50 off from you and 20
And
off.
pick them out as you go.
Yeah. And I'd take them down their alley. I'd put a boy on the gate. I'd sort them for size. Like cattle weigh 500, I'd put them together. But where you get into buying cattle is the quality of cattle. Now, we used to weigh our Holsteins at number 40. That's kind of the sorry end of the beef cattle. Then the chalks, they used to call them eastern cattle. Do you remember that word, chalks?
No, I just remember that. How sorry they were.
Well, they'd be next. We weigh them 41. We go clean up to 48 on our top cattle, which is probably black white-faced cattle. See? Well, we use them as numbers. You out there in the yards buying cattle. Well, you weigh your Holsteins number 40. You weigh your Sawyer Brindle and Browns and things 41. Next grade 42, 43, and up to 48. See? And the same way with size. You weigh your 500-pound cattle sorry ones together. You weigh your 600, 700. That's the way you classify them out.
Now they come into you though completely unsorted. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
So you.
Well, now it's different now. People's getting bigger, and there's more sorted loads of cattle, a lot more than there used to be. They used to bring them in, that's all. There's lots of sorted loads of cattle now. But still, we probably have to sort them loads of cattle again after we get them.
Well, you got to know they're sorted right.
Yeah, because they just sort them to sell. We have to sort them for what, if we got an order for a load of 700-pound good quality cattle, we can't send them 600 or 800 or 900. You know, we got a variation. We 25 pounds, 675, 7 1/4. But we're not supposed to miss them 100 pounds or any of that kind of, you know.
Can't you look at one though now and tell just about what he weighs? Yeah.
I can't tell as good now as I could when I was 16 years old.
But a lot of other things you can't do as well as you could when you're 16.
But not so much about that. But in fact, when I come to the yard, see, I bought cattle in the country before I come to the yard. And we bought cattle with $1.
Yeah.
We didn't weigh any of them, just bought them, you know, steers, $100 or $80, and cow and things like that. Here you got scales, so you let the scales do the work for you. And, you know, if we missed 125 pounds in, or 40, why, but now we got, you know, nobody's going to criticize you if you miss 125 or 30 pounds. But you can't miss them 100. And you can't send somebody a choice load of cattle, put 2 or 3 what we call cost cutters in them, you know, bring the price down. That's the only thing I try to always teach my boy. We have lots of orders for load and 2 loads of cattle. Go to Michigan farmers, Iowa farmers, and Ohio farmers. They don't know whether cattle worth 43.15 or 43.40, but they do know if there's a bad one in there, I'll tell you that. Get him out of there, put him where he belongs. If we get him bought to that sale there, well, we just got to take him out, put him where he belongs.
There's a certain art to sorting, is that right? Is there sort of an instinct to sorting?
Well, I don't know what you call it, if it's an instinct or not. I never saw very many. We had a fellow cleared who was here from Chicago, was the best I ever saw. But that was his living. He bought these cattle here, took them up there and sorted them and resold them. And that's what he made his living on, is how good he could sort those cattle up, see. And I think I made my living on giving people what they ordered. If they ordered a choice load of 700-pound cattle, give them a choice load of 700-pound cattle. If they ordered a load of chalk cattle, cost 41 cents a pound, give them a load of chalk cattle. They ordered a load of Holsteins, give them a load of Holsteins. I think that's the whole secret to it, and I never got in very much trouble. And this Charlie Ridley, I worked with him 16 years. He give people what they want. I never saw him raise the price of one a nickel. I never saw him raise the weight of one a nickel. Just give people what they ordered. I think that's the secret of an order bar. If
You got to repeat business because you're honest.
Yeah. If you can't do it that way, you might as well try something else.
Did you run into many people over the years who operated differently, and as a result, maybe didn't make it?
One or two, but generally speaking, now I've been on a lot of stockyards, like Kansas City and Omaha and Detroit and Buffalo, Cleveland, Ohio. And this is the cleanest one, Fort Worth, Texas. Fort Worth was clean. This was probably the cleanest one I was ever on.
By cleanness, you're speaking of operation.
Operation. The only trouble we had here, we never had no trouble with commission men. There was never a commission man here. Now I'm talking about the other side, the people you're like Percy Cochran and Fred. There was never a commission man that ever belched on a payment in this yard. I mean, if you bought cattle in here, you got your money for them. The only thing that I knowed was going on since I've been here is maybe a scale man was paid to weigh some cattle wrong or something like that. But he didn't last very long. They caught him pretty quick.
Now, what about Earl Schweikert's office? What do they do?
He's a manager, just like Holderby was.
Yes, I know. But what I know he is the man. He replaced Holderby.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, what is the operation of that office?
Well, they see, like our pens we got out there. We don't own the pens. The stockyard company own them, and they give us so many pens. If business gets bigger, well, they give us a couple more. If it gets smaller, they take a couple away from you, and do the same thing. And they, clean the pens and keep them up, and just general work like that. Keep the pens up, break the gate down, they fix it up.
They're your landlords in there, is that right?
Yeah, that's what they are. We rent our office off them, you see. And but this man's been sick pretty all the time he's been in there. It's like I don't know much about him. I know Holderby real well.
Schweiker has been sick?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't seen him recently. He looked a little older than I last knew him at the state fair when he was out there.
That's a funny deal about Holderby. He retired, just nobody knowed anything about it, and he didn't last very long.
He died very shortly after.
Yeah, something was marrying him. He never told nobody. He just went down terrible.
Bob Holderby is his son, isn't he? One, and I saw Bob. I was out by there, and I saw Bob coming out of there visiting with Earl.
He was kind of a hard-man person for a lot of people to know, but I played the stock market a little bit. And he did too, and I'd go in there and talk to him about that. And one thing he told me to buy Swift. He said Swift is the strongest, which I know they were, but he said they're the strongest of them, and he says they could just dismantle all their property and pay everything off, you know. $25 a share, and he says it's cheap. So I bought some, and he was right, it was cheap.
I wonder why Swift has never come in here with a plant.
Well, they were so big at Fort Worth, and they had one at San Antonio, and they had one at Lake Charles, Louisiana, and they had one at Nashville, Tennessee, and of course, when them feedlots got started out there in the Panhandle, see, they built one at Clovis and built one at Guyman.
Oh, Swift has one there?
Yeah, Guyman.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, Guyman and Clovis.
Mm-hmm.
And we sent them world's feeding cattle to, they got a big feedlot at Muleshoe. And another one Eagle at, just this side of El Paso. Ysleta, Ysleta. But they've been the strong ones in the packing business. Swift has. That kind of gets me, you know. People talk about, and the government talks a little bit. Take this over, take that over. How are you going to take Swift over? How are you going to take Ford over? How are you going to take General Motors, A&T? How are you going to take them over? They belong to people.
How are you going to? What are you going to do with the stockholders? How are you going
to? How are you going to handle that?
Yeah.
See, that was an interesting thing about the AT&T. AT&T is so big that every time they start to do something about regulating AT&T, and they're in all 48 or all 50 states, but every congressman up there gets letters from constituents, so they've never picked that much on the American Telephone and Telegraph.
Too many people on the part of it.
And actually, really, on this thing, it's surprising how good a service they give you.
I read quite a little bit about that, and they claim the best run business in the United States or the world is Swift, American Telephone, Ford, either that or Exxon. People, you know.
Well, I think that the track record has shown that too.
Yeah.
I mean, the growth that they've made.
Yeah.
Well, the thing actually happened, what happened on Ford, Ford got in awful bad shape. They went over there and reworked their company. They hired the number 2 and 3 men from General Motors. They had people that was in behind somebody else that was actually better than the guy they were under. I don't know who it was on Ford that went up and was able to hire them, but they went up there and they picked up good people. And I think that they probably had better the people running I think the people that run the Ford agencies here in Oklahoma City have been better than anybody else as a whole.
You've done well.
Well, of course, when Edsel, of course, I came from that country. I got a sister who lives in Dearborn, and Ford's Dearborn. They pay 52% of the taxes in Dearborn, and everything belongs to Ford. You can't buy a piece of property, vacant property. They'll give a school or a church or anything. They'll give it to them, but they won't sell it. That's how Henry Ford left it. But what crippled them so bad is when they died, you know, Edsel died, then Henry died, and Miss Ford died. They didn't have enough money to pay the inheritance tax. They put it in the foundation, and it's by far the biggest foundation in the world, Ford Foundation. Well, unless young Henry Ford took it over, he strapped kind of for cash. You know, he had all the plants and everything, but he didn't have enough cash to run it. Same thing has happened to Rancher. I had a real good friend, had a ranch up there at Pahuskin. He sold off and left to his son and grandson. They had to sell about half to pay the inheritance tax so they could stock it. What good's a ranch do you if you can't stock it?
And lose enough land that it becomes not as economical to operate.
Yeah. That's happened to a lot of ranches, and you know, especially them bigger ones in Texas.
Oh, as you get so big on this, I think it's just almost impossible when the inheritance tax is there that and there's no cash in a ranch. It's all done. There's a rancher doesn't have any money in the bank. It's all working.
Well, I guess everybody's that way, aren't they?
I think probably so.
You know, I suppose, I know Ford's the best off of any automobile company. I got Ford stock, had it since 1958. And I know they're better off than any automobile company, better than General Motors. I mean, General Motors is bigger, they're twice bigger than Ford, but they haven't got as good a capital as Ford has.
How much family do you have, Miss Fletcher?
Three girls and a boy.
3 girls and a boy.
Yeah.
Is your wife living?
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Died of cancer in 69.
69.
Mm-hmm.
Where are your children now?
I have a daughter in Tulsa, in Sapulpa. Her husband's a veterinary. I got a daughter in Tulsa. Her husband was in the bank and insurance business.
What are their husbands' names? What are their names?
Dr. Ritchie in Sapulpa and Dixon and in Tulsa. And my daughter that lives with me, never married, Joanne and Robert.
Joanne lives with you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then Robert is your son,
That's
who's
right.
running the company
That's
now.
right.
Do you spend most of your time now with your cattle or your...
I have been. I got arthritis in my knees.
Uh-huh.
I said I was going to quit when I was 72.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty near did. I stayed out there. And I go out there last fall. I was out there when they was real busy. Went out there a few times this winter.
Mm-hmm.
And I go up there and sit down. My knees, my legs and that. And I think anybody that's been out there, I know Charlie Ridley's worse than I am. You remember when they used to have horses, on the mail, on the pavement and things? Well, I think that's where we are. Within them cobblestones, we have bad circulation trouble, see? So I just can't sit up there like this for no length of time. That's a brutal job. Get up there at 9 o'clock, maybe sit there till 9 tonight, and run a load of them cattle a minute. I can take 4 or 5 or 6 hours of it, and then I don't know nothing. Just,
Bob, do you think of any other questions we ought to ask?
No, except this it's been real interesting.
It certainly has.
I've never actually been in the cattle business, but I've been around cattle people on the thing as to what to do, and they're entirely different than any other breed of people. It's I know the thing that fascinated me when they had all this story talking about Leo Winters, about the amount of money he was running through banks.
Yeah.
Sounded almost unbelievable. He started talking to people Hitch and other people testified in his behalf on what he was doing on the thing, and it seemed like he was more of a piker than just a great big operator.
Another funny thing to me about the cattle people is, now this deal come along in 73, 74 and 75. Now it's worse than I ever went through. But I was kind of fortunate. I wasn't operating as big as I was back 10 or 15 years ago. So I stood it all right. But the amount of money some people lost, you couldn't believe. And I think Winters is one of them. And you heard the same holler then that you hear now about the farmers. The farmers all going broke. Cattle people are all broke. I said all the time, 10 or 15% of the cattle people go broke. Not all of them, 10 or 15%. And I don't think I missed it very far. Well, heck, they're right back up, just smiling now. This market's come back up. The farmers will be the same way.
Smaller percentage go broke there than go broke in the restaurant business or the grocery business or anything else.
Farmers will be the same way. Give them a year or two of good grain prices and they'll forget their troubles.
But it's been...
I don't argue with them farmers about that. I told one of them today, I said, if the government can export your wheat, it's $6 a bushel, that's fine with me, or $5. That's all for it. But if they got to pile it up in the granary like we did here for 5 or 6 years and pay storage on it, then it's worth half what it was when you put in there the corn and things, and people pay taxes. I don't want no part of it at all. You've got to sell the product. Cattle ain't worth nothing. Don't know what you can sell them for. In the same way with grain or anything else. I'd be foolish to come around and ask you two gentlemen to. Well, I lost $100 on a steer. You could care less what I lost. Why, you might just kind of pass it off for a minute.
So an article or some magazine was talking about some farmer up in Kansas talking about it. Started off with, well, his father started off with nothing on the thing, and they had a spread was worth $3 million, and it was clear. And they were complaining about how bad farming was.
Yeah.
And they were sincere.
I got cattle out here around a little town of Calumet, and I know people up there that just, you know, hollering about this farming deal. They're wealthy. They're wealthy because their land's worth $600, $700, $800 an acre, and it 20 years ago was worth 40. They ain't got nothing to holler about.
The fellow that's hurting that's going to go broke is this young fellow that started off and he paid $700 for land, and he's got to make payments on that land, and he bought it at 10. I don't know what they paid 10 or 12%. And now he's going to go broke, but he would have gone broke if he'd done the same thing in any other business.
And another farmer that's going to go broke is somebody that his dad give him this farm, you know, or practically give it to him. Well, he built himself a $40,000, $50,000 house, and he bought a $24,000 tractor, air conditioner and cab and the whole works. See, you can't start out like that. You got to start down here and come on up as you make it. And I get that a lot from bankers up there in Kansas and Nebraska. So why aren't you financing these people up here? What's the matter? Got to go to production credit, get your money. What's the matter? They owe so much for machinery. They're all in debt head over heels on machinery. They want every piece of new machinery they can get. New pickups, new trucks, new this, new that.
Yeah, just like kids with cars.
We moved here in '39. I give $6,500 for this house.
What's happening right now? Real estate is going up faster. Real estate outside of farm property, real estate's the best investment you can make. And these kids are going out to, wife's teaching school, she's making $10,000 a year, and the boy's making $15,000, $16,000 a year as an accountant, an engineer, or someplace that way. They go out and they buy this house, and it goes up in value, but it increases in value. Now, if the things ever come up on this energy shortage and things get up as to whether these 2,000 or 2,400 square feet of house cost too much to operate. Now back east, your utility bill is up more than your house payments. And then they're going to get higher and higher here. It's going to cost too much for them to operate on this thing. But they're coming out on the thing because inflation is kicking that value up as to whether they're coming out all right. And it's cheaper in rent. And what they're doing on this one thing, a lot of them just lose it. They just turn it back and they resell it. There's a shortage of housing. So they haven't been hurt. But it's going to happen if things would get tough as to where they come back and they have to foreclose on that house and sell it for less than it's got in it, and the fellow's going to still owe some money even after it's been foreclosed on.
Well, we'll get off my housing in just a minute. What about this land that's selling for $100,000? Ain't a thing you can do with it.
I don't know. I can't see people are buying it. The thing, I think it's going to be a solution that on farmland that comes up. There's no way in the world you can go out and pay $1,000 an acre for Oklahoma land, and somebody was selling for that, and come out on it. But somebody's going to lose some money that pays that much money for it, just like that fellow you were talking about as to what they paid for it. My brother-in-law retired here a while back. He sold his farm for around $800 an acre, and actually didn't have a dime in it. He bought it through the school land commission. They come through there, and he sold the royalty off of it for more than enough to pay for it. And everything that he's got is clear. Thing is to what's doing, but the fellow that bought it is not going to be able to make it because you can't farm it and make as much money off of it if you put that money in building and loan as you got on interest. So that somebody's going to lose it on that because they paid too much for it. Just like if you go out and pay too much for cattle, there's no way in the world that you're going to make any money on it.
Well, I got a cow. I've had them several years. I guess probably 10 years. And I started out with 600. I'm down to 300, and I'm liquidating them every time I get a chance. And the only reason I'm liquidating them is the cost to keep. But I mean, I used to get a cow and a calf kept in Kansas for $20, $25. Now it's $100. I used to buy cottonseed cake for $60. Now it's $160. And I just can't afford to keep them. I'm not crying. I'd rather keep young cattle than to keep them. See. And I had a lease up here with a fellow up Blythe, Oklahoma, and, keep me a year for $54, and a couple of years ago he said, well, he couldn't do that. I said, well, what do you have to have? Well, you want so-and-so will give me this. And I said, well, I give him 64. He comes back the next year or two, can't do that. I give him 72. So I got him out of there this fall. Brought him down around the county map, but I'm just going to liquidate him. I can see their point of view of the thing. Way everything costs and the way this land and things have gone up, they can't keep him that way. He couldn't. I didn't fall out with him. He just couldn't make him. They knew he was leaving something with him that they can't make it because they'll starve him to death. Well, I can't see why this land is worth it. It ain't worth it to grow wheat on. It ain't worth it to pasture cattle. And Oklahoma's just got two things working for him, and that's cattle and wheat. I mean in the farm business. I'm not talking about oil and things. Cattle goes with wheat just like ham and eggs. Farmer ain't going to make money growing wheat if he don't have cattle. Just like the Illinois and Iowa farmer ain't going to make money with hogs with corn unless he has hogs.
Like a mountaineer sells his corn, you sell his corn in whiskey, you sell your corn in beef or pig or pork. But well, somebody's going to lose some money. That's the thing. But
I can't see where it's worth it.
It's not.
You can't grow anything off it to make that much.
Investors are going in there to take your banker and your lawyer and your other people that have got excess money to invest. You go out there, and they're going to lose some money on it, just like on the stocks that went up and they dropped back down. But as long as land's going up 11% a year, you can't find a better investment. You don't have to pay any taxes on it.
Well, I've been selling quite a few cattle now since the first year. I like the price. 50 or so some cattle, 50 cents a pound. And I've been buying utility stocks. And I'm buying them like Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Missouri. Right. So I keep away from the big city deal. I don't want no part of that. And every stock I've bought yields 8 to 9%. I can't make it on them cows. And it's a hell of a lot easier to take care of that stocks than it is cows. I could be wrong, maybe, but that's.
I worked for the OG&E for 40 years.
Well, I bought some OG&E too the other day.
And as you talk about in that area, they're going to go to burning coal. We're building. I retired here last August. But they're building 4 coal burning plants. The coal's coming in from out in Wyoming. They got coal out there. It runs from 25 to 200 feet thick. They got 4 coal trains that's bringing that coal in. And there's no easier way to use energy than in electricity for heat, light, or anything else. It's going to get higher, but everything else is too. And I just don't believe that there's a better investment than there is in utility stocks.
I noticed our gas bill, first time it ever was that way, was $100. But I was really surprised what our electric bill was. I don't pay no attention to it at all. It was $20. We got electric stove, and lights and things, $20. That's cheap.
Unless you got electric
Yes,
heat.
you got all. I got electric heat, and boy, mine's way up. Yes,
Real high?
Yes, Mine
Well,
is
now, of
so,
course,
too
the only
high.
thing you're talking about housing. They don't build houses as good as this one's built anymore. And Joe, your
Well,
wallpaper
I think-
canvas?
I don't know, we bought this house was built in 34 and we bought it in 39. And there's a man built this, that he was a teacher, and he went to the Philippines. He caught up in that war deal. And all this all supposed to be built mahogany doors and all that. The upstairs wasn't furnished, and I put that on, and that's the sorriest deal I ever saw in my life. What the downstairs is. It's terrible.
I'm going to close off our interview. This has been an interview with Roy Fletcher on March the 6th of 1978, also with Robert B. Campbell assisting and participating.
Have you seen any houses that